Hello friends, welcome to this audio tutorial. My name is Harshit Dwivedi. So I would like to tell you that today's audio tutorial is related to the Regulating Act of India 1773. It is also famous as Regulating Act of 1773. Before telling you something more about Regulating Act of 1773, I would like to tell you that if you are preparing for competitive examinations like Staff Selection Commission CGL, Food Corporation of India, SBI PO, even Civil Services, Public Service Commission, even I am preparing for Civil Services, Indian Administrative Services. It has been around 1.5-2 years I have been preparing for IAS. And this is a small, you can say a hobby or a small passion from my side, or you can say a small hobby to help people. This audio I am recording by reading through my prepared notes, which I have prepared studying over the last 1.5 years. So by this, I hope that I would be able to help a lot of you guys, because it is true that you will be able to find written material at a lot of places. You will go to market in 200 or 300 rupees. You can get a good book of polity, whether it is D.D. Basu, whether it is Subhash Kashyap or M. Lakshmikant. There are many books, many good books of Indian polity in the market. But the point is that reading becomes a boring thing. By doing this, by bringing this study material to you in the audio form, my objective is to make learning and studying for you more friendly and helpful. And it is very obvious that you can just plug in a headphone in your phone and listen to my tutorials. It is not that much a difficult job. And you can do this through your computer, laptop. You can also do this through your smartphone. Just plug in your headphone in your smartphone and click the play button and the audio is running. So I'm trying to maintain full efficiency in all of my audios. I hope you will like it. And if you want to see it on my website, you can also visit there. The URL of my website is www.articlemaniac.org. I would like to spell it www.article spelling ARTICLE. After that, maniac spelling MANIAC. I repeat, MANIAC. articlemaniac.org. org. So once again, I welcome you all, and now let us start with our audio tutorial of Regulating Act. So before telling you something about Regulating Act of 1773, I will like to trace in brief the evolution of British entry into India. Not British rule, British entry, precisely speaking. So in 1600 AD, the East India Company entered India as traders, obviously. And the most important point at that time was that by a charter, or you can say by an order granted by Queen Elizabeth I, the East India Company had the exclusive right of trading in India. That means Queen Elizabeth I has given her permission to the East India Company that it will be the only company who would be operating as a trading company in India. So, after around 165 years of business in India, in 1765, the British rule, or precisely speaking the East India Company rule, was a bit changed from commercial activity to administrative activity. That means that seats of administrative actions were sown in by the British Empire in India. This happened when the East India Company got the trading functions right. And by precisely speaking trading functions right, the traditional name of this right was Diwani. 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 Now, after hearing this word, I am sure that a lot of you guys would have heard this word Diwani. It is a very famous word and it has been used in numerous pictures and serials and in novels, in articles, in newspapers, wherever you have read it. It is a very common word, Diwani. But still, I will tell you what this word Diwani means. So, if we go literally by the meaning of the word Diwani, so if we want to know the exact meaning of the word Diwani, then we can say that Diwani literally means the right to collect land revenue. This means that the East India Company got the power to collect the land revenue. That means that the East India Company got the power to obtain Diwani. Now, in the context of India, the meaning of Diwani was not only limited to revenue or land revenue collection. The point is that by saying Diwani in the context of India, it is not only the right of collection of land revenue, but it also had in its ambit the right of civil justice. So in the context of Diwani in India, Diwani meant right over collection of land revenue and also right to civil justice. And this right was granted, this Diwani right was granted to East India Company in 1765 at 3 places. Those 3 places were Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. I repeat, at 3 places they got it. It was Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. Now, after around 8 years after obtaining the Diwani, the East India Company got the Diwani in 1765 and around 8 years after 1765, that means in 1773. Now, you can say condition of East India Company in 1773 was not good financially. That means that its financial condition was not good. It was in dire financial constraints. In spite of being a monopoly trading company in India from the British Empire, and at that time the British Empire was huge. In spite of having that, the financial condition of the East India Company in India at that time in 1773 was not very good. The main reason of the financial condition of East India Company not good at that time was that there was a huge amount of corruption inside the East India Company. There was a huge amount of corruption there. The servants of the East India Company, they were engaged in one or more or private businesses trade. They wanted to make money, and for making money they were doing all sorts of wrong things. The point is that at that time some officers, in order to fill their pockets, they were not totally loyal towards the East India Company or the British Crown, and because of this they frequently used to accept gifts, presents from the natives and locals of India, from the local Maharajas of the princely states. And they were also engaged in some sort of private business trading with the locals. So these all things which the servants of the East India Company were doing, they were doing these things in order to benefit themselves. And at that time, they were not thinking about the benefit of the East India Company or ultimately the British Crown. So because of this, because of this problem. And this is not the only reason. There were many other reasons at that time. So if we are going to go deep into why this happened and why Regulating Act of 1773 was there and why the East India Company was in dire financial straits, there are a lot of reasons. This is one of the most important reasons. So I told it here. It is also a very bit of sort of interesting. So I told it. So through this Regulating Act of 1773, it was one of the most important step by the British Crown. And we can say that it was the first attempt by the British government to control the affairs and functioning of East India Company in India. Before this, the British government never intervened in the processes of East India Company. Obviously, East India Company got the monopoly of trading in India, and British government was forced to enter in it at this time, intervene in it at this time, because a huge amount of corruption was there, and it was high time that the British government should do something in order to remove this corruption. So we can, in other words, also say that roots of centralized administration were sown in through this Regulating Act of 1773. Now, by the Regulating Act of 1773, for the first time, the British government demarcated means separated, and gave recognition to the administrative and political functions of the East India Company. It means to say that before this act, before 1773, and in the period of between 1765 and 1773, there was no recognition from the British government to the East India Company. The point was that this company had the exclusive trading rights in India, and in exchange of those exclusive trading rights, this East India Company has to pay a certain amount to the British Crown or British government. But due to these inefficiencies and worsening financial constraints, the British government for the first time demarcated and gave recognition to the administrative and political functions of the East India Company, in an effort that by demarcating the functions within the East India Company, administration can be improved. Obviously, if we in a company, if we make different departments, and in those departments we allot persons that are experts in that department, then obviously they are going to handle their department in a pretty efficient manner. So the point is that if a person is from the finance department and he is working in finance department, is good. But if a person who is working in finance department and he starts interfering in the department of a person of marketing, so something messed up happens. So before this 1773 Regulating Act, all of the members of the directors of East India Company, they were the bosses, and they used to do everything what they liked, and this was creating the problem. So by dividing their administrative and political functions, British government tried to improve the administrative efficiency of the East India Company. Now here I will dictate to you some of the important inherent characteristics, features of the Regulating Act of 1773. I advise you to make notes of these features and try to memorize these notes. And after memorizing these notes, close down your copy and take a rough paper and write these notes on them. If you are going to write some memorized thing again and again, then after 2-3 times you will be able to totally understand what that is, and in the future if you are going to read it once again, you will automatically remember all those things that you have memorized earlier. So this is a very good thing. If you are studying with writing, so writing is a very efficient way of learning. If you are a good writer, you can easily learn much. But if you learn much, you can't write good. Unless and until you write, you cannot qualify civil services examination or other PCS examination or those examination in which you have to write down. And obviously we are talking about Regulating Act of 1773. So this act is not very much important from the point of view of examinations like SSC CGL or Food Corporation of India or other examinations, other objective examinations. These sorts of acts, the Regulating Act of 1773, the Pitts India Act of 1784 and the Indian Council Acts of 1862. So these sorts of acts, they are important from the point of view of preparation of civil services, Indian Administrative Services, PCS. So what I am going to dictate you, the features of the Regulating Act of 1773, it would be better if you jot down these features. And I will speak slowly so that you are able to write down simultaneously. So the first feature, in 1774, through this act, a Supreme Court, in 1774, through this act, a Supreme Court at Calcutta was established. A Supreme Court at Calcutta was established. The Supreme Court was comprised of one Chief Justice and 3 more judges. I hope you have written this first statement. Now I will explain this to you in a bit detail. Now don't write this what I am saying now. That in 1774 a Supreme Court was being established by the British government in East India Company. The objective of doing that was that there were many disputes between the officials of the East India Company, or there was a dispute regarding monopoly of over a certain department, or maybe a land acquisition case, some case between the native rulers or princely state rulers of the princely states and between the officials of the company. There were many such problems at that time, and there was no central authority who could exert its pressure on the employees and say that what I am saying is right. Obviously there was a miss of ombudsman, you can say, OMBUDSMAN. Ombudsman is an authority which has the power to negotiate between two persons. Now Supreme Court in this context is also an ombudsman and also a decision maker. Any dispute could have been solved by putting the case in front of the Supreme Court. So this was one of the most important features of the Regulating Act of 1773. Second feature. Write down the second feature of Regulating Act of 1773. Through this feature, the designation of Governor of Bengal was changed to Governor General of Bengal. Now previously, the person who was the Governor of Bengal was now called the Governor General of Bengal. A 4-member executive council, was formed, whose job was to assist the Governor General of Bengal. Now at the same time, the governors of other presidencies, the 2 other main presidencies of Bombay and Madras. So the governors of Bombay presidency and the governors of Madras presidency were put under the rule of the Governor General of Bengal. So through this feature, I would like to explain it to you. The designation of Governor of Bengal was changed to Governor General of Bengal. And before this, the three main presidencies, the presidency of Bengal, the presidency of Madras, and the presidencies of Bombay, they all the three have their own governors, and all the three governors enjoyed equal rights and independence in their area of authority. Now, when this act was passed, one person was made the authority. That means the Governor General of Bengal was the authority and everybody else was subordinate to him. So the governors of Bombay Presidency and the Governor Generals of Madras Presidency became subordinate to Governor General of Bengal, which meant that they had to report to the Governor General of Bengal in matters related to civil, revenue or military affairs in India of their presidencies. So this was the second most important feature of the Regulating Act of 1773. Now, one of the most favorite questions of all objective examinations. A lot of times we have seen this question. Who is the first Governor General of Bengal? So the answer is very easy. The first Governor General of Bengal was Lord Warren Hastings. Lord Warren Hastings. Spelling is Warren, Warren. Hastings, Hastings. Third feature of the Regulating Act of 1773. In this act, it was directed to the Court of Directors. Court of Directors was the governing council of the East India Company. It was comprised of officials which used to lead the East India Company. So, in this act, it was directed to the Court of Directors that it is mandatory for them to report to the British government on their administrative affairs in India, whether they are political, civil, revenue or military. In short, the governing council of the East India Company, or more precisely speaking, the leading officers of the East India Company were giving strict directions by the British government that whatever functions they are doing in India, whether those functions are political functions, civil functions, revenue functions or military exercises, they have to report to the British government about the functions that they are doing in India. Fourth important characteristics of the Regulating Act of 1773. Servants of the East India Company were prohibited from participating in any private business or trade. They were not allowed to accept any form of gift, presents, bribes, valuables or any other things from the natives or locals of India. This means that the main reason, the reason of corruption, that the officials of the East India Company were engaged in private trade and they used to take gifts from the native rulers, the princely states rulers, in return for some favor to them. So in order to stop these things, the British government strictly directed to the servants of the East India Company that they cannot do any private business trade there. If they want to do, they have to tell about it to the British government before starting it. Also, the servants of the company were disallowed from accepting any present, bribe, or any sort of valuable or money from the natives or locals of India. So, in short, this Regulating Act of 1773 tried to remove the bottlenecks which were present in the functioning of the East India Company. British Crown realized that if this thing is going to happen in this manner, there are full chances that the affairs and the control of East India Company servants over the administration of India, precisely speaking, would be loosened, because attitude of some of the servants or officials of the East India Company was very callous. So in order to amend it, this Regulating Act of 1773 was passed. Now, this Regulating Act of 1773 was up to a limit successful in removing the bottlenecks of the functions of East India Company, the erratic functions of East India Company, but there were many bottlenecks in the act itself also. So, in order to know what were those bottlenecks in this Regulating Act of 1773 and how can they be removed, this we will discuss in our subsequent lectures when I will tell you about the Pitt's India Act of 1784. I will cite the reasons that why Regulating Act of 1773 was not successful up to a large extent and how to make the provisions of Regulating Act of 1773 more efficient. Pitt's India Act had contained some provisions that made the rulings of Regulating Act of 1773 more effective. So guys, I hope you liked this lecture. The most important thing regarding this lecture was the main 4 points. The first point was of Supreme Court. The second point was of Governor General of Bengal. The third point was of the reporting of the Court of Directors to the British government. And the fourth point was prohibition of the servants of the East India Company from taking any sort of bribes or gifts or not to engage in any private trade. So these are the main 4 points. And whenever a word or this phrase Regulating Act of 1773 comes to your mind, you should remember these 4 points. These 4 points are the gist of these acts, and if you know this, you can answer any question which is related to Regulating Act of 1773. If there is a question which asks you that what was the first step by the British government to centralize the system of administration, your answer will be Regulating Act of 1773. So friends, now I am finishing this video. This video has been a bit long. I hope that the next video will be a bit short. And my personal experience says that whenever we are explaining something to someone, in order to make that thing enjoyable, we have to explain it with points. Because if I am not going to explain it, why this thing happened, why this thing happened, why this thing happened, after some time your interest will go out. And if you are going to get this thing with full facts and full scenarios and full history, then it will be very easy for you, comparatively easy for you to understand these things. So I hope you like this audio tutorial, and keep bookmarking my website page. I am uploading audios every day, maybe videos in future. Right now I'm uploading audios and text material. And if you have any suggestions, please leave the suggestions in the comment box of my website. On any page, I will read it. So guys, Have a good day. Goodbye.